everybody. Grant Hunter here with another Product Growth Leaders Product Conversations. Gosh, Steve, it's been a running joke since we've been doing this. I mean, back in the days, even when we started doing this with COVID, that every once in a while I'd do Steve did that a long time ago.
Right.
So the inspiration for this episode probably started, back then, but we had Rich on earlier this year celebrating the second edition of his book, and he talked about the importance of product management communities in metro areas being able to have the experienced people, the older people, share that knowledge and pass it down and truly build practices like in Silicon Valley, Austin, Atlanta, some of the Boston, some great cities. And we decided we should get some of the wise people who've been doing this for literally decades together and have a conversation on, what have we learned in decades of product management? What could we learn today that we might have forgotten already? I think there's probably more product management capability lost in this panel, forgotten in this panel, than many of the thought leaders posting on social media today have. And, so I figured I knew where I was going to go with the first question. Then Saeed Khan, our good friend, put in a comment today. Is there over 100 years of product management experience on the panel?
I think I have. so just for clarity, me alone. My first product job was 4 years before electricity was discovered.
The fact that I'm probably the junior person here, and I've got 20 plus years, as a product manager, product leader, instructor, coach, that type of stuff. I'm going to easily say, at least with the five of us, we're at 100. Steve and Rich alone might be able to get close to.
I've got maybe 35, Steve. I think you have a couple more than me.
I can't do date math.
Okay, that's fine. But
and I'm not going to ask Barb or Pamela because we're not supposed to talk years with.
We're not supposed to talk about that. No.
But one thing I wanted to start with. We hear product management has become, whether it's because the definition of what is product management the scope has grown or not. A lot of people I want to get into product management as a first job. And at least when I started back in the day, nobody went right into product management. It was always like a third or fourth job. And just to set the frame, I'd love to go through each, what was your path to product management? I'm going to start with Pamela.
So I was an engineer, went to do my MBA, started working for Apple in the marketing area. And at one point they realized I worked a lot better with deadlines. So they switched me to product management, which I think was officially product marketing at the time. It suited me down to the ground. I loved it. It was so busy. I was constantly talking to lots of people and communicating, and it was lovely. Yeah.
All right. Barb, how did you get in?
Well, it was totally accidental. And I worked for a software company. I joined a software company because I couldn't get a teaching job. And so I had no technology. I never took a computer class. No technology in my background. And I ended up at this software company because our president liked to hire teachers because we had some skills. And so taught us the technology. But, I did almost every job except for finance and programming. And I was demo girl, and I was, doing all kinds of things. I did training, I did implementations. And so I got my hands dirty, got into everything. And it was accidentally that I got into, it was product marketing. I was actually getting ready to leave the company. I had like 7 interviews at Grid. I don't know if you guys remember.
Sure. Yeah.
And I had been at this small little software company for, 15 years at that point, but was bored. Oh no, I guess it was about 10 years. And I was bored. I was release queen, with the clipboard. And so I went through and they offered me this product marketing job and I freaked. And I actually was getting ready to accept the job. And my dear friend who I ended up working for twice, John, he overheard a conversation that I was having with somebody about the job, and he came bursting in my office and said, "You're talking to Grid. How can you leave us?" And I couldn't lie. And so he ended up creating a product marketing job for me. And I took that job. I didn't know anything about product marketing. And I started, going to lunchtime seminars and stuff like that. And I loved it. And of course, I loved the product side of it. I didn't know anything about marketing, but I had already had that sort of, you have to learn everything from the customers. Even in my demos, I'd always ask questions so that I could always tailor the demo to what their key pains were. And then, I ended up taking a class at Pragmatic in, 97 or something. And I thought, when I met Steve and he came and did a training class in Ohio for me, I thought, I want to do what he's doing. And
so you started out not being able to get a teacher job, and you ended up an instructor for the leading training company for product management.
I've had education in my entire career, even now in my volunteer job teaching art to kids. So
yeah,
but
I noticed that you said you couldn't didn't know that much about marketing because you didn't know how to lie.
That's true. Well, I couldn't lie.
All right, so we got Pamela and Barb. Rich, how did you get in?
So my first job out of school was I was a developer. I wrote COBOL way back in the day. If anybody's old enough, right? Did that a couple of years at Hewlett Packard. Was kind of bored. Didn't find my way. Dropped out to do an MBA because I didn't know what else to do. Ended up back at, in those days, Tandem Computers, which was an HP spinoff. I spent a year in corporate strategy, which felt honestly kind of empty and useless. And then they said, well, there's this product manager job over in the communications area. Do you want it? And my two responses first was, yes, of course. And then, well, what's product management? And in those days, that was late 80s, at least there, product managers were sort of the manservants to the engineering teams that we reported to. And our job was to get, make sure stuff shipped. Luckily, the engineers I worked with actually knew something and had a good idea of what to build. So I avoided the mistake, at least on my first outing, of building the wrong thing. I got to do that the second time.
All right. And Steve, I've heard your story so many times. We probably shared it on this thing, but just to keep with where we're going.
Well, my story is similar to the others. I was planning on majoring in computer science in university, and then I encountered COBOL, and it pretty much ruined my life. I did have
I'll give you lessons, Steve.
And it was Rich. It was COBOL on cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course it was. Yes, I remember.
So anyway, I at that point knew that I had made a mistake by not taking typing in high school. I chose to take driver's ed so that I could date, but I didn't know that I would need typing so much more than I would need dating. But anyway, so I was a programmer. I'm sorry, I was going to be a programmer. I ended up shifting over to a marketing major, and after school, my first job was a programmer. And so I did that, and my boss did something so amazingly kind. After a year, 18 months, I think, he said, I want you to interview with a buddy of mine. And I'm like, oh my God, are you firing me? And he's like, no, you're fine. But a buddy of mine is hiring for sales engineers, and I think you'd really like that job. And I'm like, well, what the heck's a sales engineer? I mean, none of the jobs that I've had seem to have ever been mentioned in college, right?
It's an engineer that gets paid more.
Yeah, maybe.
Or a salesperson who gets
engineer
paid
with
less.
social skills. What can I say?
As I understood it, it was, two people go on a sales call. One of them knows the product. One of them drives the car. So I did sales engineering for a couple of years. And then I thought, well, heck, I can drive a car. So I'll go into sales, and found out there was more to selling than just driving the car. There was also discounting. And I suddenly became the number one sales rep for this one product because I had used it way back as a programmer. And my boss said, I don't know what you're doing for your success, but would you train the rest of the office? And so I trained the rest of the office. And suddenly our office was outselling the rest of the country. And the VP called me and said, dude, I don't know what you did to Virginia, but come do it to the rest of the, the rest of the sales offices. So off I went on a road show, and basically I just ate my way from Virginia to California. You went to Chicago and had their crazy wagon wheel pizzas, and then I went down to Austin and had some tremendous barbecue, and went back over to Raleigh and had some pork barbecue, which is different than Texas barbecue, and all the way finally to LA to my corporate headquarters, and I'm teaching this sales enablement type stuff. And the VP of marketing comes in and says, who are you and what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Who are you? And what are you doing in my room? But anyway, he said, I'm the VP of marketing, and the product manager should be doing this training. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. Why isn't he? And the VP said, that is a very good question. I'm going to look into that. But meanwhile, I'd like to recruit you to become a product manager. And as Pam and Barb said, it was actually a product marketing manager. I was coming in it from the sales side. And then I did, product manager, product marketing, director of, VP of, and then a buddy of mine started Pragmatic Marketing, and a couple of years later called me and said, dude, I'm making a living. Come join me. So I was the first instructor hired at Pragmatic, and I was there for 15 years. I've been gone for about 15 years. So putting those two together, I'd say I've been doing this coaching thing now for 30 years.
Yeah. It's interesting because I came from market research and strategy into it, and I sort of came into it as the product strategy person. As a director of marketing title, I was building the strategy for the product because nobody was doing it. And they said, hey, why don't we make you the director of product management? Okay. And that's how I got there. But, the world has changed a ton around us. And the first question I want to ask outside of how do we get here is, how has product management changed over the past decade, for the better or for the worse?
Can I
Rich?
begin? Sure.
Yeah, please.
So I think we've seen a tremendous wave, and it's tied to the whole social networking world here, which is there's now hundreds, thousands of people who are posting about product and blogging about product and podcasting about product and writing books about product, which I think is great because it gives us a sense that there's really things happening out there. The two concerns I see, one is there's this sort of general assumption that the folks writing it are claiming that it's the best practice or the way to do it right. And I have yet to find in my 37 years doing this that there's any one model that works uniformly, independent of context and company size and B2B versus B2C. So I really worry that what we're doing is we're hypnotizing ourselves over sort of narrow best practices, which only work for 1 or 2% of the companies out there, and everybody else doesn't recognize them. And that contributes a lot to this sort of innate imposter syndrome that we all feel, because if we're not doing it exactly that way, this week I think we're calling it a product operating model. Right? If we're not doing it according to somebody's product operating model, we're doing it wrong, and I think that's just not helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the best things I've learned through doing these calls is I had 20 some years of experience. I've taught it, I've coached it. And every single week I learn something new from somebody who's had a different experience in a different company. Every company is different, right? And so there's no one size fits all when it comes to it. I love it. Thanks, Rich.
Sure.
Who wants to go next?
Well,
Barb.
So I'm not in the trenches like you guys are, but have kind of come back to product management after retiring for a while and doing volunteer work. But it's in some ways, there's a lot of similarity that there's things don't change as much. I mean, the amount of information available to us is huge. So that is a huge thing. And I think the social media, as you say, Rich, has contributed to that. I mean, when I was a product manager, I had no idea before I went to Pragmatic and at least had the grid. It was like, yeah, this is, an outline of what product management is. I had no idea. And I didn't have anybody to talk to. None of my friends were in tech, and we were a little company. And until I had a really great mentor, we hired a new guy. I didn't have anywhere to turn. Everything was inside out. But we also are experiencing cycles. So, people say things are so much worse now. I mean, the economy's bad. We've got ChatGPT ripping apart jobs. Well, okay. I was in Y2K. I was in the dot bomb. I was in the housing crisis. I mean, it happens. It's cyclical. It's like weather. It changes all the time. It's that change that's constant.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a challenging world, and of course, right now we're in that area where people are having trouble, staying employed.
So here's kind of what I see today, as opposed to before. I think product management is seen more of a technical role now. And Rich, I'd love to get your perspective on it. Although we advocate for it to be strategic and forward thinking and get everybody together and all those other things, I think many times more than ever, product managers are driven into the weeds, absolutely in the weeds. And what they lack is a sense of marketing, a sense of positioning, a sense of what it's going to do in the marketplace. One of the things that I find as a product manager is I will approach virtually any situation in terms of, can I influence someone to adopt whatever, right? That's my first thought. If I were doing product management today, I don't know that I'd have that instinct. I'd love to hear other people's opinion.
If I can lean in here for a second, because I think what I see, and I'm not sure it's different from, previous eras. I think at the company level, there's this pendulum swing, right? And so at some particular organization, we've overcorrected by being too technical and sitting with the engineering team and not talking to enough customers and building the wrong stuff. And, sound echo chamber talking to ourselves. And then the executive team leans in and grabs the wheel and twists hard. And now product's going to report to marketing for a while. And so now we're okay for that sort of 6-month transition, but pretty quickly we discovered that we've lost touch with our engineers and we don't know what they're building, and we've lost our technical sense, and we don't understand the releases, and we're just parroting back what we hear from customers that they would like in a sort of unpolished way. And so the executive noticed that we've overcorrected toward marketing, and they grab the wheel and they turn it really hard. And so at any one company, what I see is this back and forth. I'm not sure there's a sort of market general movement here. I think we're sampling this at different companies at different moments, and we're catching that swing back and forth in a way that feels universal, but maybe it's going on all the time everywhere.
So has been for decades.
Do you see that there are more? Well, one of the ways to avoid this is you have the PM, the product management office, right? You have somebody in that role, right? Who kind of, I'm thinking of a surfing metaphor. You kind of like trying to balance so that you're standing vertically, and they're competing forces, right? That are trying to knock you off one way or the other.
Yep. Steve, what do you think?
For what it's worth, the first product manager I met was in 1982 at a extremely well-run software company. And she was absolutely a business role. She had an MBA. She was writing business plans and, portfolio documents and Tam Sam Sam and all of that stuff. And then I think what happened was Agile broke product management. Scrum came along and said, all you need to be available to the developers 24/7.
Yes.
Right. And I was at a conference with an agile coach was speaking, probably a Scrum coach, and he was talking about the roles, product owner, Scrum master, whatever the third one is, the team. And he said, the product owner's role is to be available 24/7. And somebody raised their hand and said, well, when is product owner going to be doing the rest of product management? And his answer was, what else is product management except being available to development 24/7? And no bad, not. That's not even necessarily a bad thing. It's that product owner was defined by a developer of what a developer needs. And if you went to the sales team and said, hey, what would a good product manager be like for you? They would say they would be available to me 24/7. And if they've got any time, they could also help another salesperson. But, I want my own private Wikipedia available in real time. And the other funny thing is, I've been telling a story now for 30 years. I had dinner years ago with a policeman, and he and I were talking about challenges at work. And, I did a few of my traditional product management rants. And he said, oh my gosh, how do you deal with the stress of product management? And I went, wait a minute. You used to be a policeman. And he's like, yeah, but we had training. We had backup.
They had guns.
We had roles and responsibilities. And to that point, we had clear roles and responsibilities. We had the support of our management. And I'm like, oh yeah, we don't have any of that. And it turns out that's the way it was in 1987, and that's the way it was in 2024. I read the other day that fewer than 40% of product managers have ever received training in product management. And I'm like, how can that be? I mean, I've trained 50,000 people, but apparently they've all been promoted. So,
and I think, Steve, there's another statistic which correlates to what you're saying, which is 60% of product managers want to leave.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they're
number one.
By the stress.
Number one, senior product managers average pay $165,000 a year, and 60% of them are looking for a new job.
And the other 40% are in divorce proceedings, I think.
Well, the 40% got training, right? So the 60% don't know what they're doing. Right. They want to get out, right?
Right. And I see those posts every day or so on Reddit. Somebody will say, I've been hired in this job. I've gotten no training. My boss doesn't seem to know it any better than I do. Yeah. I'm completely lost. And so, you just kind of dive in and do stuff. But what that typically means is you're going to get pulled into UI and project management and design meetings and journey mapping and.
I was on a call just yesterday with somebody who's in a product management team, a big company, product management team of I think 22, and not a single one of those folks had ever been in a product management job before. Not a single one of them had ever had a mentor or coach to tell them what it was. Not a single one of them had any way to succeed other than picking up a book and trying to, generalize from the wrong things.
Right.
And they were surprised that all of them were frustrated and failing and looking for other work because we had, they had been thrown in the cold water, no practice, no help, no support, no agreement about what they were going to do, no executive clout. They needed the gun, I think, is what they needed. But, and just over and over again, I see whole departments full of people who are either subject experts or former developers and salespeople who get the badge and assume that if they get the badge and look at the job description, the job's not so hard. And it just makes me cry.
Well, I think it's, let me add to that, which is when you get the training. And by the way, I was realizing, Rich, you wrote a book, I wrote a book, Steve wrote a book, right? Like we've been through this, right? And I've actually heard.
Barb and I haven't. We've read books.
Okay. It's okay. I got mine somewhere. I actually found this organization, what they were doing instead of training, they were literally taking it chapter by chapter.
Yeah.
Right? Like they were training themselves, right? But they realized they had an issue. And ultimately, what the training does, it allows the product managers to turn around and say no, or to draw the line and say, I know sales that you would like me to be your personal sales assistant, but I can't do that. And I can't sit in the UI meetings, endlessly. Talk to me when you've got more progress, or I'll give you guidelines.
One of my favorite presentations that I did at Silicon Valley Product Camp, I did it at several of them, was how to say no without getting fired. And it's very difficult.
And it hasn't changed since you've been.
I've only been fired a few times for saying no.
Well, you have to do it with finesse, because you can't just say no all the time. But if you don't say no, then what are you not saying yes to? And and it's always difficult when the things that are piled on you are from your boss directly. So you got to learn how to say, okay, well, you've got me doing these 5 number 1 things, which we need to order them.
Which of those number 1 things?
Number 1 thing is the
That's
real number 1 thing.
And the idea that if I had a better spreadsheet with more columns and more algorithms, and it's 17 columns wide and 1,700 rows long, is somehow going to get humans to agree that they don't want what they want and don't think they're my boss. It feels like a fundamental, a conceptual problem of, I'm an analytical and I want the rest of the world to be just like me so I can control it, instead of the chaos out there just keeps rolling on.
Well, it's interesting.
We have an illusion of control. Yes. I don't think we actually control.
Not much.
I think we heard the chaos. And Steve, that's your favorite.
I can't remember who it was. It may have been Scott Selhorst a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the business role of product management. It may have been Saeed Khan or Jason Knight when we did the sales one. But somebody was talking about this need to help them, give salespeople a little product sense, help them understand this, markets versus individuals. And, I've been doing an informal poll with clients when I speak for over a decade. And it's a simple question. How many people have more ideas than resources?
Everybody.
100% over a decade. And, this was the case 20 years ago when I was a product leader, 30 years ago when I was, a market research person. Everybody has. If you have more things, if you have more ideas than you have capacity, we need to figure out how to focus the right stuff. But again, this hasn't changed,
I think it's gotten worse. I mean, so I did an audit with one of my clients, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, where we added up all of the incoming requests by Slack, by email, by phone, by Post-it note, by interrupting the meeting, right? And there were like 9 other channels. There were some forms to fill out, and we just added them all up, and we got something like 27 times the likely throughput of the engineering team, not 27%. And so with the idea that we're getting 20, 30, 40, 50 times as many requests as we can ever possibly honestly even look at. And so when you flip that on its head, you say, okay, we have to be able to turn down, walk away from 95% of all of the requests, as Barb says, without getting fired, right? And that's a perception problem, because everybody who's putting a ticket in or a Slack in or an email in believes at that moment that is the most important thing for them, their customer, and the world. And so we have this mismatch between, I need a thing, I want a thing, it's important, I just talked with the customer, and I'm smart, so say yes, and the sort of law of gravity that says 95% of this is going to get left on the cutting room floor. Let's move on to the 5% we care about.
Well, so that's where I believe strategy comes in.
Yes,
right?
Of course.
Strategy and guidelines. And by the way, like I said, I do this automatically in pretty much everything. So I was doing something the other day, and the first thing I put up is, these are the guidelines for taking action. If it's not within that, I'm not doing it. Right? Just because you think it might get done. If we do this, we will succeed. And it was amazing. I didn't get any any feedback on it, because it made sense. Right?
Good for you.
And actually, I was going to go to a question. One of the questions I've written down is, what is the biggest cause of the change in product management over the decades? And part of us is saying there wasn't much change. It is what it is. But part of it was, Steve talked to Agile being this big, centrifugal force, gravitational pull that has had impact. I want to go to the strategy side, right? Where is, I did some research, and it was like 80% of the product leaders said that the problem with alignment was there was a lack of corporate strategy. It was a lack, at what point, I guess we're getting pulled on two sides gravitationally, or one is there's a void on one side of strategy, and on the other side, you've got the centrifugal force of Agile. Is that, do we have to fix the strategy problem?
Rich? I think I'm going to, okay. Before we even go there, I'm going to say that I don't know about you guys, but do you remember annual planning? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? Who can stick with an annual plan nowadays? I mean, forget about whether they actually do it, whether they follow through, whether they align resources behind it. But things are moving way too fast.
Sure. I also see that I see a lot of things, big air quote strategy here at the corporate level. And I look at it and I say, well, those are meaningless, do all for all things, compete in all markets, win all products, make the most money, be happiest and be tallest and have the highest NPS score goals. And most of what I run into there is entirely useless for making a decision about a product or a product portfolio until you say, well, this audience or market or segment is more important than the other market or segment or group because we think we're going to make a lot more money there, right? Back to Pam's point, or these are the geographies we're going after, and these are the segments and the industries we're going after, and the thing that's lacking is the executive gumption to say, and if you're not in those geographies or segments or industries, we're not going to do anything special for you. You're welcome to buy it off the shelf, but don't darken our doorway with anything that you need, right? And that's the place where product strategy has to hang off of a corporate strategy that actually has hard choices in it. And I see the big consulting firms coming in with their 97-page decks that don't force anybody to make a choice as to where we're going to spend our money and time and R&D and sales attention or whatever. And honestly, if you can't pass the sniff test of what am I saying no to, then I don't know how, then it's a small s strategy, as in I have a strategy to come in tomorrow and get paid.
There's a couple things on that.
I know that we used to go to organizations and we used to make them say, you can't have everything be number one.
Right.
Not everything could be number one. And the room would get really quiet.
Yeah, I like to say, you can have almost anything you want. You cannot have everything you want. But, Grant, before you go into that strategy thing you're going to do, I think there's another aspect of when I became a VP, I got no training. It was like, welcome aboard. You now have 12 people. Don't touch the girls. That's basically, the thing, and it seems to me that the strategy decisions are being made by directors and VPs as if they were still independent contributors. That I was talking to somebody the other day and I'm like, your product now is the people who work for you. Creating, team, creating process, creating success. You got to stop managing the product. You got to start managing your people. And that was like an eye-opening statement from me.
No, it is. And what I was going to say about strategy, Roger Martin, who's probably the one of the top two contemporary people who writes about strategy, and his blog on the Play to Win framework is amazing, actually has moved away from using the term strategy as much as possible because he thinks people don't know what it means. And he's talking about it's all about making decisions, right?
Yes.
With strategic bets. And how do we do that? And what I would say is that's a mind shift, right? To get people to change. Maybe books like Thinking in Bets by Annie Dukes can help us think more. The Right It by Alberto Savoia, right? I can't remember Strategizers, Bets, experiment testing in his experiments book. I mean, there's some great books out there to help us do that, but it's a total mind shift. Yeah. And I come from an annual planning background, but the problem is, most companies do a strategic plan and an annual plan all in one, and you don't get the value of the looking further out or the detail of the annual plan. And so coming from GE and that type of stuff, I was doing 3-year plans. And actually just the exercise to make you think about your market and what's going on and the changes that are happening. If it's not tied to a top-down numbers, you just have to hit this number because this is what our FP&A people say we have to hit. I think can be value in every once in a while taking a step back and looking at everything and reprioritizing where we need to go. As a product leader, my goal should be to give those boundary positions, those guiding things to help my team make the right decisions for their stuff.
And I'm going to drag this a little bit back because Steve, you brought it up, which is when you have a group of product managers that you're working with, you're their coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And too many product managers gain success and kudos for making products happen.
Mm-hmm.
And not many, as they shift into that other role, realize that it's such a profound change. I belong to a Facebook group with women in product, and the amount of problems they have because their bosses are micromanaging them. They just never gave up the control. Right. And so, if we look out into the future, it's not only what's happening with product management, but what's happening with explaining to managers correctly what they're going to be doing and not doing.
Right. And exacerbated by a lot of people who are heads of product have themselves not ever been in product.
Yes, don't get me started on that one. But yeah, in fact, again, a conversation many of us have probably several times a week. But if I were going to hire the head of engineering to build software, the very first question I'd ask is, have you ever built any software? If I were going to hire the head of revenue or the head of sales, the first question I ask is, have you ever carried a bag and hit quota? The first question I ask of my CFO is, do you know how to tell if there's money in the bank and how to pay payroll and keep us out of jail? Yet somehow everywhere we all go, we bump into CPOs who have never done the product job, don't know what it is, can't manage or coach any of the folks working for them. And some of them, you got to spot them all the consonants to get the title right. And they're wonderful people who are great at something, just not this.
But to compound that, Rich, often they think they're really good at it.
Oh yeah, well, I read the book and it inspired me, and there we are.
Well, as I like to say, nothing seems hard to people who have never done it.
That's right.
So Barb took me back with her Silicon Valley Product Camp presentation. Are there any lost product management skills that we should try to bring back? Right? Is there stuff that we had this conversation last call when we were talking about the business role, how there's a whole bunch of product management titles out there who are doing stuff that we didn't call product management 20 years ago, right? A lot of business analysts and designers with product management titles. Are there things that we don't see people doing today that worked for us back then? I don't know. I don't have anything set in my head, but is there anything that we should look back and say, boy, that worked pretty well?
Well, the easy one, of course, is talking once in a while to somebody who's not in the building.
Yeah.
I mean, it surprises us how often we see people. More often than not, it's that they're afraid to or don't want to talk to the customers. Then it's they're being blocked.
I think some of them are being blocked. I do.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But I talked to somebody, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago who said he'd been in the product owner role for 3 years and had never met a customer. And I think maybe it never occurred to him to visit a customer. It was like I was sharing new information.
But open up the Scrum book. It doesn't say you do that.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah.
It's the ideal girlfriend for developers, but it isn't actually what the job needs to get done.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to agreeing with Steve. It goes back to seeing customers. One of the huge benefits I had early in my career was we actually did presentations, a lot of presentations, sometimes 5 a day presentations. And maybe that was too close to sales. I'll give you that. We got a lot of feedback. Mm-hmm. We heard from people loud and clear.
And that's still valuable, although, if you were in a sales mode, that means you were listening not to customers, but to prospects, and not to users, but to buyers.
Yes, agreed. I remember getting a new product line.
Well done.
I remember getting a new product line and my boss said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to a trade show because I wanted to hear from people. I wanted to see who showed up.
Yeah.
Right.
Every time
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, please.
One of the most valuable lessons when I was in training mode in a software company And we had this god awful complicated order management product that of course Silicon Valley loved because, multiple ship dates, for chips. And I mean, Oki Semiconductor was one of our big clients, and Linear Technology, who, if you were in Silicon Valley, you'd probably hear of them. And I had Linear Technology in this order management class, and I just learned how to do training on this product. I knew how to hit function 5 to bring up another window, and I knew the technical aspects of how to get through the screens. And I had this woman in my class who was, so these were all people who would have been taking the department that would have been taking the orders and marketing their products and working with distributors and stuff like that. And I'm showing her how to do pricing. And so I'm showing her the screen, and she said, well, what about disty pricing? I said, well, what's a disty? I don't know what you mean. She says, okay, tomorrow morning, meet me at my office. It was, it's like, okay. And I went over to her office, and it was so profound for me. I still remember the binder she opened that she says, this is disty pricing. These are distributors. This distributor gets this price. This distributor gets that price. This one has these terms. And the light bulb went on for me. Now I knew how to answer her question and how she needed to set it up. But that one encounter, I started multiplying that. And that's how I was actually getting ready for the product management role. And listening. And it was down at the user level. I would get the buyers when I was demo girl, but it was listening in a different way. And it stuck with me. I can still see Pat in that office.
And how many of us have had that sort of epiphany?
I'm sorry, what?
How many have had that epiphany?
Yeah.
I'm hoping all of us.
Yeah.
This predates Teresa Torres's wonderful book. So
Yeah.
if you were doing that today, right, and you were in an online environment, right?
Oh,
would you be able to meet that person?
I think you could meet them remotely. You could do a screen share with them. Almost nobody has paper binders anymore if they're not running previously for president.
Yeah.
But you could do a screen share with them, and you could turn on the screen recording and watch them struggle with your product. Which, gosh, if there's anything that's going to create humility and ego reduction among all of us, it's watching somebody trying to struggle through the product that we know is really easy to use because our engineers told us so.
And we have tools for that now.
And we have tools for that. Of course we do.
But you want to have a conversation every once in a while, not just read all of the
Sure. It should be live and interactive so you can ask the question.
Yes. Why did you?
I think in some ways it's easier. We don't have to get on a plane now and do this sort of Königsberg Bridge tour where we figure out how to get across the country and stop at the most number of customer sites with the least miles, right? You can zoom in and do that for 20 minutes or whatever your tool is, and you don't even have to wait through security.
And then you use that time if you happen to be traveling, you can use that time to build strong relationships with them and not get into it. For me, I will say, I was a turnaround person. The way that I went from a director of marketing to director of product management was I was trying to figure out how to turn around this division. And I went and talked to customers. Nobody was going and talk to customers. They thought they knew it all. And, what I've often said is give me 5 or 6 conversations with customers in a specific segment. And when I'm done them, I'm going to be able to change our strategy based on what I've learned. Into the conversation. So it's sort of that's been fairly unanimous. If there's one thing one lost skill of product management, it is actually doing that discovery. It's actually doing those conversations. What do you not miss from 20 some years ago? What are you glad that's moved on?
Oh, I don't miss Scuzzy Terminators.
I thought you were going to say Scuzzy executives, but keep going.
That too. I used to literally, if you open my purse, you would find Scuzzy Terminators. I worked for some reason, I happened to work in storage for quite a while, off and on.
I
don't miss the amount of hardware I had to deal with. I really don't.
I don't miss the whole product management organization reporting up through engineering. I mean, it does in some places, but one of the few really major steps I think over the last I don't know, 3 decades, is in a lot of good companies, we're the peers of our engineering partners instead of the employees. And that gives us more voice. Now if we and our engineering partners could just get into the executive suite a little more often, that would be good. But I think we've had our status elevated a little bit. We do need to deflate our egos, because sometimes it feels like we want to be more important than we are. But we're an important part of that. And I think when I first started, I was in fact the one who was 24 hours available to the team, and everybody assumed I didn't know anything. And honestly, they were mostly right that year.
Yeah. Barb, what don't you miss?
Well, it's kind of weird because the fighting with development, because I didn't have any social skills at that point. And I'd come home and I'd be complaining about the day, and my husband says, "You've got to stop fighting with your brothers when you go to work." It was totally siblings. We would get into a room and I'd be screaming at each other, and they would always make me cry. Like, I was young, and I don't miss that part, but I actually do miss when we did start working together, same team.
Yeah.
And we turned our little software company around when we hired a man who became my mentor, Pat. And we were a little kind of consulting company. We do everything for money, right? And everything was a project. And I already kind of had that markets rather than customer innate sense. And I'd try to get, well, instead of doing it this way, if you do it that way, these other 5 customers could also use it. No, we're not going to do that. But once we all started, and Pat brought in, this whole strategic thinking. And he's the one that, sent me to product management training. Yeah. So it was that fighting, and I didn't have the skills to communicate what I really needed from market knowledge.
And I would argue that, one effect of all these thought leaders and people talking is there's probably more people talking about the collaboration relationship between development and product than has ever been. And so hopefully there's some learnings to be had there.
And design.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, Rich, I'll get to see in a second. What I don't miss is my design person on my product being the graphics design person from the marketing team. The fact that design is an actual role in B2B now I like the graphics design guy. He was a nice guy, but it wasn't really good for UX. Steve, what don't you miss?
I don't miss functional and non-functional requirements. I was working with a guy that Barb knows, and he was like, "No, you have to write it, the product shall. You can't say will, that means one thing, and must means another thing. So the product shall do this, that, and the other." And then he instantly converted over to user stories and basically wrote them the same way. Basically, as a user, I want this feature so I can have this feature I want. And I really like the original intent of user stories, which was tell me a story. Tell me a story about a problem, not in that format of as I want, so I can. And that whole formulaic requirements thing was always super irritating to me.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. Who here has done the 50-page PRD, MRD, whatever you're going to call it? You miss those?
Nils Davis in the chat, that was his answer. A big ass PRD is what he doesn't miss.
Yeah,
that's right. Well, at least the MRD was only 40 pages, so then we could make the 200-page PRD that indexed each of the paragraphs on the MRD by hand on paper.
How to do it, right?
That's right. Now we can write useless MRDs and PRDs almost instantly instead of spending our time writing.
There's actually someone who wrote an AI engine to create PRDs, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, I follow them, and it's pretty cool what they've created. We had actually a conversation. May Wong facilitated a conversation, gosh, a month and a half ago or so, with John Cutler, Graham Reed, a couple other people. I'm drawing blank on the names right now, which was on PRDs. Actually, I think Nils was one of the people on that call as well. And you know, I think that we have, you know, they're still there, but I think in many cases we've moved past them. Last question I'm going to ask before we do our wrap up. If you had a magic wand and you could grant the practice of product management anything to help evolve it properly in the next decade from your learnings, what would you wish for the practice of product management to put us in a path where we're in a better place in 10 years? Barb.
Well, the one thing that we need to keep in mind, and this actually came up in one of my museum meetings where we go out and, you know, the classroom, nothing can take the place of thinking for yourself. And you've got to get out there so that you're not just, you know, making stuff up in your head, but with all of the tools we have with ChatGPT and all of those kinds of things, if you don't gain the knowledge and then think for yourself, okay, what does all of this stuff mean? And you're kind of curating all the content. But let's not forget that part.
Barb, boy, I just reread, and Steve's tired of me talking about this. I just reread The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, where he talks about Boehm's dialogue and the importance of going into a room where everybody suspends their assumptions and their titles and actually has dialogue, right? And learns from each other and grows from each other. Boy, if we could do that type of thinking and do it ourselves, but also as an organization, as a team, oh my God, would that be amazing? Hell yeah. So Barb comes in strong with thinking. Rich.
So I'd say that there's a cyclic thing here, but right now I think we're at peak self-importance. So product folks, we believe that we are really important to the conversation, that we get a seat at the table, that our opinions are the strongest ones. And I find when I'm in that place, I'm not doing as good a job and I'm not helping folks. And so the leave your ego at the door. Don't feel like you have to be the smartest person in the room. Question your own assumptions. You know, the X-Files truth is out there. The idea that we've gotten so self-involved in all of our classes and models and templates that I think we've lost the story here. And I want to be important because of the things we do and the products we ship and the customers we make happy, instead of the title I have and which you know programs I went through to teach me how to be a CPO.
Steve and I have been debating. I've been with one of my clients using this concept of open product management. And it's based on open book management from the book, The Great Game of Business, where they basically taught everybody in the company to read the books so they could make suggestions to get better. You know, this client the product department was very insular. And so we're trying to open it up, get insight, get knowledge, get insight, you know, participation from everybody else. Steve doesn't like open product management. Maybe it's inclusive product management or empathetic product management. But the reality is we need to take a step back and realize that we're helping bring people together. Cliff Gilley, I saw a slide from his presentation at Industry Up on LinkedIn, and he talked about how we're sort of this key point to get all the stakeholders to work together. And we can't do that if we are working from this place of hubris and self-importance. I love it, Rich. Pamela.
I have so many. I want to add the word synthesis into all this because I think we do. If we do humble synthesis, we would do a great job, right? We do better. I think along the way, we lost a lot of marketing in the product management space. Mm-hmm. And if I were going to add one back, it's the one thing when people go and do an assessment, they come back and they say, you're asking me all this stuff about marketing. It's like, if you don't know how someone's going to figure out about your product, I don't know how you can build anything, right? You actually do need to understand how people adopt stuff.
Yeah. Jason Knight said that in our one, we were talking about sales and product management. He said, if you don't understand the go-to-market strategy, how can you build the product strategy?
You can't. You can, but it won't be good.
Yeah. No, I love it. Steve.
Well, I think I lost the thread on the question, but I do want to glom on to
It's
what
age,
What can we,
Steve.
what magic wand a wish to make product management better in 10 years? What would it be? We've got thinking. We've got less self-importance,
humility.
humility. We've got synthesis.
All right. Well, I guess I'll circle back around to your point on open product management, except perhaps the word I'm looking for is collaborative.
Yeah.
And in general, I wish that product managers were more curious than they seem to be. So I'm thinking my daughter was dating a product manager who finally admitted that he had never used his product, which was a consumer product that she used. And when he told her that he had never installed or used the product she was using, she said, "You're dead to me." And then she fell in love with a designer. So there's peace in the family.
There's hope.
All right. I mean, some great hopes, I guess, for the future from the gray hairs, beards, and such. Our final question always is, what's your biggest learning or takeaway from this conversation? And I'm going to start with Pamela. Pamela, what's your biggest learning or takeaway?
I guess the one phrase that stuck with me throughout this whole conversation is agile broke product management. And I don't know if agile, and I'm kind of going between agile broke product management and agile fundamentally changed product management. Right. And I think I'm feeling like there's a blog post somewhere in there, right, about agile broke product management. So that's
I love it. Rich, learning or takeaway?
I'm just the kaleidoscope of where we've all come from. That there, at least historically, hasn't been a single well-defined path to get to what we're doing, but that we're all bringing random pieces of our random experience that have been helpful, as long as we remember them and hold on to them a little bit, rather than I don't know if anybody's ever met a 7-year-old who said, "Mom, Dad, I want to grow up to be a product manager." Haven't found that person yet. So that we're all on various paths here. And that's good, because we're bringing all the learning that we had before, rather than just starting from scratch.
Rich, you've got me going back and forth between Carl Sagan and pointing at a star and how all the randomness brings stuff together, in the opening to Our Town, where she's talking about, all this stuff that I don't know where I get those things. But
on a call yesterday, I threw out the phrase "Brownian motion." And it was a guy, not English language initially, but he was a physicist, so he knew what I was talking about, which is all the randomness out there and all the things that look organized, but they're really random under the covers.
Completely and totally. Barb, biggest learning or takeaway?
Well, the opportunity of sharing the morning, your afternoon with this group, and just how talking to multiple people and, listening and learning from each other. It's been great.
See, I was hoping your learning was going to be, God, these conversations are so good, I should be on more.
We'll see.
I guess not. Steve, biggest learning or takeaway?
Gosh, these conversations are so good, I should be on more.
Steve, you're on all of them.
There we go. I tried to say it in my best hypnotized voice, too. I think we've all had similar and dissimilar paths to this really interesting job. And it's my hope that some of that exposure to a lot of the thinking that's available now everywhere just kind of further the idea of the need for new product managers to have a mentor. It's not in the book. The book says, I worked for this one company and we did it this way. And The other book says, well, I work for this one company and we did it this way. And I've talked to consultants who say, oh, yes, I have ones of companies in my, testimonials. I don't believe in best practices. I believe that you need to take the greatest hits and build your own process. And I think that we do a lot of that, but we also encourage people to adapt. And so it's not like there's one path. It's not all engineers need to turn into product managers So we all get to this exciting role in different ways.
And yes to everything that's been said. The one thing that keeps popping in my head is talking heads, same as it ever was, right? Same as it ever was. We're dealing with some of the same exact problems we were dealing with 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I feel like if we're stuck in, this
but
chaos at times.
I think that's the job, though.
Yeah.
I think if we smooth it all over, they wouldn't need any of us anymore.
Yeah, that's very true.
That's the fun bit. That's the fun bit. We don't know what we're going to get. We don't know which part of our life we're going to pull in tomorrow to fix it.
And somebody that comes into this role doesn't necessarily have even just the institutional knowledge that is around them. You get a newbie right out of college and they have some fresh points of view, but some things that we just take for granted and know, you think, how come they don't know that?
The number of times I've had to tell people some first principle things, segmentation and Pareto principle, right? Little things. It's like, if you can't do 95% of the things, Pareto principle becomes one of the most important ideas out there. So I know 80-20, not 95-5, but well, Barb, Pamela, Rich, of course, Steve, what an amazing conversation. I say this every week. I mean it every week. We have people saying it in the comments. What a great conversation it has been. So I thank each of you for being part of this. Hopefully we can get you guys onto some more of them. In 2 weeks, Mei Wang will be back with us, and we're going to be talking about budgets and budgeting for product organizations. So totally different topic, but still maybe when we talk about annual planning, something that's very important for product leaders at this time of year. So again, thanks everybody. If you're not following, follow us on LinkedIn. We do these every 2 weeks, and thank you. We'll see you guys. Have a great weekend.